Nearly lunchtime. Usually I get the spot just after lunch, which is extremely hardworking. And for those of you who lifted their hands up to sit more than 6 hours, please feel free to listen to this standing up. I do not want to be responsible for some of you not to be around when the 10 years are over, and we can see the research that has come out, which is a very interesting topic. I'm actually not the star of the duo here, because I give an introduction simply in why did JLL, I mean, most of you will know, it's very much around the built environment and the physical workspace in terms of buildings, campuses. So why are we looking into, the softer side of that? I think, like, many moons ago, and I think like all your organizations are in the same spot, we realized that actually what we're influencing is the blue bubbles at the top. That's the built environment, and there's energy cost in that, and was part of a very early sort of slide of our research together. But the orange bubbles are what makes this tick, and I think to a degree it's been, we've heard about the people, about happiness, about all the important factors around HR. So we're trying to figure out how actually, when we're sort of looking mainly at the blue bubbles and probably the purple bubbles, how can we have an impact, and what is the linkage between, our core business and productivity at work? That was where we're trying to explore how can we focus on this and make this, happiness at work, and it has a whole load of components. Why is that so important for us? Because we're looking also at factors that influence productivity, and that is productivity of space and place is one element that's fairly easy measured, as we all know. The old square meter per person rule comes to mind. But if we're looking at people, factors influencing people productivity, we're actually dealing with a bunch of very soft, it's about culture. How do you measure that? We all know it's true. Everybody knows that, as we heard before. But how do we actually make that connection? And that's why we wanted to explore health and well-being, the green and productive workplace in relation to a work environment, and embarked on the journey with the World Green Building Council to actually launch an extensive research over a year to make that connection, and John is going to share some of those findings with you. I think we've heard enough scary stuff actually. Just sitting there made me feel like, I'm seriously at risk, and I'm probably in the moderate group of moving around, because I move around all the time. But I think we see an increasing factor that ties into happiness. It's like the whole psychological effect of our always-on culture. We're expected to respond within seconds. We have to be always switched on. The human brain has not really made a fundamental leap to match technology leap to really cope with that. And I know that younger generations find it more easy. If I see how my children do homework these days, they've got about 20 applications open at any given moment in time. Their screen makes me crazy, but they do their homework like that. There's Facebook contacts for project involvement somewhere in Australia. There's Instagram. There is, all these things they have open to finish a given project. For me, this is like, this is total information overload. So we see, the effects of all of those, wonderful advances and drivers, technology advances, globalization, all of that is actually having a tremendous impact on our health. And so we believe that, for many organizations, that is still an untapped potential, the biggest probably in terms of productivity. Because of the challenges around measuring that, we keep coming back to the same discussion. Square meters per person are so much more comfortable to measure, because we can do that by counting heads and getting out a yardstick. But this is sort of really the impact that some of that work that we do has on people. So when we look at, from our perspective, the space is what we're comfortable with. This is core, but we're increasingly moving from workplace to actually work itself and actually fundamentally to the worker, because the building doesn't earn a living. The building costs money, and that needs to be controlled, but the building itself does not create shareholder value necessarily. So we're looking at how work processes, how information are flow, and very important also how, you know, organizational culture and the change and creation of that is actually having an impact on productivity. And where that comes back to sustainability, I think, you know, we've all seen sustainability was, when I first moved into this workplace realm, sustainability was a buzzword very early on, and it's sort of, it came and went. But now I think we're looking at sustainability together, you know, in this project as really a holistic sustainability. We're not looking about the facade or the air condition or the lighting only, but we're really looking at it from a building, people and emotional. So we're, you know, we're looking at the virtual, physical and emotional workplace that, you know, that we're trying to sort of get, you know, the productivities and all levers of productivity going. So this is why we were quite excited to be part of that. It's been fairly extensive primary and secondary research to really look at sustainability as a green and productive working environment. So with that, I hand over to John, who will take you through the research itself and also some of the key findings. And the right clicker does work.
Right clicker does work.
Yeah.
John, have a seat.
Nobody's standing up. I'm sort of getting worried now.
Thanks, Claudia.
People at the back. So, yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Very nice to be here. You may well not be aware of green building councils. Just very briefly, there are green building councils now in about 101 countries around the world, and in all cases, these are bottom-up, industry-led organisations that obviously are, well, not-for-profits that are around campaigns for a sustainable built environment. And we're interested in this topic because for us, there's not much point having a lovely, environmentally friendly building if you put people in it and then it all goes to pot and they hate being in that building. So people obviously are fundamental to our understanding of what sustainability is, what a sustainable building and a sustainable built environment is, and those linkages between carbon, energy, resource efficiency and the people in the building and their health and happiness is really what this report was all about. So this report was, it was a very much global project, involved 20 countries, so 20 GBCs across all the regions in which we are active, 40 different organisations. And all of this is already online. We launched the report about a month ago, and all the research that we comb through and so on, there are links through to all of that, and there'll be an app coming out later in the year as well. I mean, experts working in this space have known, you know, for a very long time that office buildings impact the health, well-being and productivity of the people in them. That sort of sounds really obvious, but this isn't yet translating into mainstream financing, investment, leasing decisions. So that was really at the heart of the report. And I'm going to take you through just a few sort of headlines. Don't worry, I'm not going to get bogged down too much in the detail. But the project was about bringing together most robust and also most recent evidence on this link between the building and the user, and presenting it in hopefully a sort of non-technical, fairly sort of mainstream, easy to understand way as well, that people could talk to with, depending on where you're from, could talk to with clients or could talk to with your agent or with your architect. And we also examined the extent to which strategies to maximise human health, well-being and productivity were compatible with or even enhanced by strategies to reduce energy and resource use, i.e. is there a link between what we sort of tend to think of as green buildings and that human health and productivity. So, I mean, just really briefly, look, indoor air quality and ventilation, this was a massive issue. There are, I mean, literally scores of studies showing the benefit of good air quality and ventilation, double-digit productivity improvements, very common in the literature that we reviewed. I mean, one study estimated that doubling the fresh air supply was worth about $400 per employee per year. Thermal comfort, very closely related to indoor air quality. And in fact, separating out the benefits can be quite tricky, but it's very typical to see a reduction of about 6% in productivity as temperatures get too warm. And actually, personal control is really important here. Really big factor in improving satisfaction and productivity. One study showing about a 3% increase in productivity with an element of personal control. Lighting and daylighting. I mean, our scientific understanding of the impact of light is growing all the time. Important not just to be able literally to see what we're doing, but for our body's circadian rhythm. One of my favourite studies that we reviewed showed that, and this is from this year, showed that workers with desks near a window slept on average 46 minutes more per night. So actually the office having an impact on them outside of the office, and then of course coming back the next day. And increasingly actually it's difficult to sort of disassociate the impact of daylight from a window with the impact of the view out of that window. Particularly when the view is of nature. And there's a prominent study showing Californian call center workers' productivity improving about 12% when they had a view out of the window and a view of nature. And this sort of so-called biophilia that you may have come across before, I'm sure, the psychological importance of that instinctive bond that we have with nature is becoming more and more prominent as a theory for why we perform better and why we are happier when we have some sort of access to nature, whether that's visual or very literal in terms of green space and so on. And of course, that's equally, if not more important in city centre locations. Noise, pretty obvious, not going to dwell on that, obviously a major cause of dissatisfaction. Interior layout, we've talked a bit about already this morning, becoming increasingly clear how important it is to have that variety of spaces for collaboration, for concentration, for creativity, and so on. Another favourite bit of research that we reviewed last year, Bank of America conducted a pilot in one of its call centres, and you can imagine how many call centres they have globally, which showed the design of, the value of designing for cohesion, so designing for staff to feel like they had a bond and were actually enjoying working with their colleagues. And by ensuring that staff took breaks at the same time, as opposed to at different times, and ensuring that there was a place for them to congregate and mix socially during those breaks, that it had such an impact on staff turnover and productivity when they got back to work, that they figured out globally if they rolled that out, it would be worth about $15 million to Bank of America. Look and feel, far less quantifiable evidence here, but I mean, it stands to reason that the aesthetics of the office, the colour, the contours, the materials, and so on, are going to have an impact on our brain and how we react to the office. Interestingly, that's going to be experienced differently by different genders, different cultures, different ages, and that's something that we also have to take into account. I mean, active design, we've heard a huge amount this morning. Sitting is the new smoking, heard that quote before. Multiple benefits from staying as active as possible. Of course, that's not just about when you're designing a new office when it's a lot easier to do in terms of where staircases are and so on, but it's also about what you can do in offices that already exist. Lots of companies taking a serious interest in this. Lend-Lease, who were also involved in the report, ran a pilot in their Sydney office, their Sydney HQ. I think it was called Stand Up Lend-Lease, to encourage walking meetings and walking, standing up when working. And they actually attached those sensors to people that beeped when they had bad posture. They worked with a local university to sort of understand what the impact was, and it was very significant indeed. It's not just the building itself, the office itself, but it's also its environment. What's the commute like? What are local services like and facilities like? All of that has a big impact on people's sense of well-being, very literally in some cases, in terms of their commute, and obviously the facilities they use and so on. And as I said, we looked at this issue of the linkages with what we would sort of perhaps traditionally think of as green offices. And we found that there's often a virtual circle of good design that works for both people and planet. Whether that's increased daylight, meaning reduced reliance on artificial lighting, whether it's use of natural ventilation and mixed mode air conditioning, which actually could be used in a lot more environments. Healthy materials, less off-gassing of chemicals, and obviously building in biodiversity. All of these things work for both people and environment. But I think really, really important, and you know, there's a sort of credibility thing here. You know, we cannot say that a green building is a better building for people's health and happiness. You need to address both of those issues and look at the linkages. And obviously, this was a global report. And if you look at places like Hong Kong, you know, you simply are not going to be able to build a productive office, you know, that doesn't have some conditioning of the air in a humid climate. There are energy implications of that. So you need to be realistic. But we've already talked a little bit about sort of the need for evidence, and the second sort of part of this report was all about trying to understand how the building actually impacts people in terms of people's own sort of business case. So, you know, dedicated to trying to provide guidance and a framework for people to understand their own business case for healthy, productive green offices. So that was really all about this point of measurement. So we started with a list of about 40 different metrics for measuring or indicating in some way health, well-being and productivity. And we whittled that down to these 6, which are all focused on sort of outcomes for the organization. So we were keen on suggesting metrics that are easy to measure, but that also had a financial implication, because obviously those are going to be the most relevant you know, for bean counters in the organization. And what we thought was that actually lots of data exists already, but it isn't being thought about in terms of place. It isn't being thought about on an office-by-office basis, or you know, even a team-by-team basis. So you know, none of this is particularly rocket science, but it's about how we collect the information and what we do with it, where it's held in organizations, and which teams are talking to each other, or at the moment, sort of not talking to each other. So our recommendation is people have a think about you know, whether they collect these sorts of data sets in their own organizations, and that's going to mean getting HR people together with FM people, together with finance people, and actually from our point of view, I think there's a role for sustainability professionals in helping to bring those different features together. But of course, those metrics alone, those sort of outcome metrics for the organization, are not enough for people to clearly sort of make the business case and understand their own situation. Ooh. You also need, you obviously need to understand what we've called physical metrics. So the office itself, light levels, temperature, ventilation rates, all of those things that obviously I've just taken you through. And it's very, very important as well to ask people. So what we called perception measures. So, and you can get a hell of a lot of really good information from a well-designed but fairly simple sort of perception survey. And it's the relationship between all 3 of those things that is going to help people understand the impact that their building is having on their staff. So if we better understand those relationships, I think the sort of practical or the potential for practical application is really quite significant, whether that's due diligence on new space or rent review on existing space, or fit-out guidance on refurbished space. The way I see it is that health and well-being and productivity is essentially going to become a risk issue. You know, in the same way that energy performance has, you know, gradually risen up the agenda over the years, that occupiers are beginning to take an interest in it, and that feeds through to investors. I think health, well-being, and productivity is going to, you know, come up behind that and go way ahead of it in terms of this being an issue that is, you know, right at the heart of decision making in real estate. And energy, of course, tends to be a bit of a niche interest. It tends to be, you know, the sustainability person or the CSR person, or 1 or 2 people have got an interest in the environment that care about it. But health, of course, is something that interests, you know, absolutely everybody. And I think it's going to be a very, very significant issue for analysis of risk around portfolios and assets going forward. So that's it. I would just say that I think in terms of next steps, I'd encourage you, if you haven't seen it already, to have a poke around at the report, have a look at the research that we've brought together. What we're going to do sort of going forward is bring together a group of people that have got an interest in this and been talking to 1 or 2 sort of major global occupiers about this already, who are really keen to try to pilot the sorts of framework and some of the guidelines that we have suggested to come together with like-minded organizations to share data, perhaps on an anonymized basis, and to really understand, okay, I've got this data, I'm trying to understand what it means for me, for my organization. What's that like compared to other people? You know, is this average? Is this good? So we're going to be bringing together organizations of like minds in the coming weeks and months going forward, and do so in a joined up way with our colleagues around the global network as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. We do have a few minutes for questions. If anybody has a question, there's one right there at the back of the room. Thank you. And we will have time for one other as well. So if you're thinking about asking a question, be ready.
Great. Paul Miller, CEO of the Digital Workplace Group. Really enjoyed the talk, John. I was going to come at 8:30 this morning, but I couldn't face getting onto the Jubilee line because of the crowd. And it seems to me that the offices themselves, once you get there, are extraordinary. But the issue that I feel are facing is that you've got to get there in the first place. And I'm sure if we could have all walked here this morning, we'd all be in a better place, emotionally, as we've been talking about, than we are having to make the commute here. And I don't have an answer to this, but it feels like this is the elephant in the room. I just wonder what your thoughts are around that.
Well, I think you're right, and I mentioned briefly, you know, we had a chapter on location. So we were very, very conscious that, you know, for example, the commute that people have has a major impact. Quite difficult to get. There's not a huge amount of quantifiable evidence on that. There's a little bit of information from places like Holland, unsurprisingly, on the benefits, for example, of cycling to work. But perhaps when we get a little bit more information coming through, that will feed through into decisions a bit more clearly. But I do think it's getting there.
I think I'd just add to that as well. To that, from an office perspective, I think it's also worth exploring if we're just focusing on bringing people to the office, or actually whether we can start bringing the office to people. I think we see a whole initiative and I had a very sad discussion again this morning with somebody in Germany, where I'm from, about this whole issue of, how this whole homeworking issue. I think we need to not just focus on bringing people into the office, because in some locations that is a hardship. I've walked from the hotel this morning, so I've done a fair bit of, a little bit of exercise. It's about what can we offer. If we believe that health, well-being, walking, standing is important, but so is that creating a sense of community. So how can we leverage all of that to probably offer a more diverse portfolio of working opportunities, rather than just making everybody come into one and the same place. I think it will be a very interesting transformation journey over the next few years that I'll be quite excited to look at, really at the fully distributed workplace without losing company cohesion and identity, or probably that is morphing into a more shared economy, so that's all out there, and I think that will probably also be a factor that contributes to that.
Thank you. And there was one more question there at the back. Terrific.
Thank you. Keith Warburton of Video Conferencing Insight. Just answering Paul's query he raised a few moments ago, I seem to recall at Worktech a couple of years ago, one of your speakers did note a survey that had been done that said most people do not want to work at home, they want to work about 20 minutes from home.
I don't know whether that's a question, but I would entirely agree. I want to work at home. I have an office, my children are at all-day school, so I have all the peace and quiet, but I get distracted because I'm lonely. So I start doing odd things around the house because I need activity, I need the buzz. So, I work at my kids' school library very often, just because there's noise. Obviously not during a conference call where I have the major speaking part, but, I'm looking for buzz. It doesn't necessarily have to be JLL buzz, it could be other people's buzz, but I realized that I have to learn that. I'm very, my productivity, I need to have very specific tasks to be working from home, or a very good reason to be, you know, from a location perspective near home. But I think the ideal workplace for me would be one that was about a 10-minute walk away from where I live. That would be brilliant.
Terrific. John, Claudia, thank you.